We move forward here. We are now in the last chapter of the textbook, and we're looking basically globalization. Economic globalization is going to be the start, and then global problems will be the end here. So let's look. We got a world without borders, and one of the major hallmarks that have happened since 1945 has been just this expanding trade, growing foreign investments, etc., etc., etc. Now, one of the first things to look at here is the rise of free trade. There's a general agreement on tariffs and trade that was signed in 1947 by 23 non-communist countries, and that is known as GATT. And then a group comes in called the WTO, the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization is basically a forum to settle trade disputes. At this point, 97% of the world countries are a part of this. And so the country, we started this class talking about trade. We're going to end this class talking basically about trade because now trade can really happen with anybody in the world. The WTO will work to settle trade disputes between countries and work to establish that there aren't going to be trade wars between countries. I don't mean like a physical fighting war. I mean like retaliation against different policies that move forward. Global corporations have also been on the rise. The transnational corporation that companies have businesses all over the world. Okay, and so for example, you look at this is to look at some of the companies. If you look in the middle here, you'll see like Kraft, Nestle, Procter and Gamble, Coke. You can see all these different brands that they have. And that is hugely because the whole world is interconnected with each other at this point. It's really the world is a single marketplace. And transnational corporations will move to wherever the jobs are cheaper and who can do them best, and a combination of both. How did we get to this point? First, Japan. Japan, 1949, they had come back to pre-war levels, and there was a Marshall Plan in Europe, but also in Japan as well. Japan had an agreement with the U.S. that Japan could not spend more than 1% of its GDP on military, so they had to spend their money elsewhere. And when you're putting all of that money elsewhere in your economy, it's going to grow. Japan put a lot of money into low-wage jobs, and since the people there are really good, the country just grows and grows and grows and grows into an export-based economy. At first, they're turning out textiles, iron, and steel. During the 60s, they switched to low-end manufacturing like of radios, TVs, motorcycles, and cars. In the 70s, they become more and more higher levels of technology. Eventually, they will inspire what are called the Four Asian Tigers. The Four Asian Tigers, which are Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and South Korea, that they are just going to grow and grow and grow. Another group that's working on that is the BRIC countries. The BRIC countries are also part of a group of countries called the NICs. The NICs are the newly industrialized countries. The BRICs are a specific trading bloc amongst them. The BRICs are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South America. And by South America, I meant South Africa. And they get together and they work together to make sure that their countries are competing on the world stage. They are big time trying to emphasize education, entrepreneurship, and get foreign investment to get their views out there. The NICs are just a group of countries that are nearly industrializing anyways. What you're really looking at here is this interconnected world. The fact we can interconnect with everybody on a daily basis. Now, one of the places that big time has had this is China. China has seen significant growth this year since the 1970s. Seen significant growth since the 1970s and the 80s. They basically now are more of a market economy. It is not a perfect market economy by any stretch of the imagination because, for instance, you can't communicate on all the pieces of technology in the world today. China has been providing cheap labor around the world. At this point in time, China still provides cheap labor, although it is becoming more expensive just because the Chinese middle class is going. In 2001, China did join that World Trade Organization and really solidified them as an economic world power. Something to think about here is China in reality is returning back to where it was before the Opium Wars. Okay, China and India are returning back to where it was before the Opium Wars because that's where they had been. And they have so many people, and they're still really powerful in today's world. At this point, they're still very wary of foreign influence, though, because that's just who they've been. Think about their history. The century of sorrow. You go back through, and you have being taken over by Japan. during World War II, and then just really kind of their whole relationship with the Soviets, that China is still wary of outsiders. Now, another part of their share of the energy demands around the world. I'd forgotten that slide was there. Now, another group here of trading bloc countries that have come together. The next one it's an economic alliance. It's the EU. EU had a long history, whether it's the coal and steel community, not long after the World War II. And that's going to morph over time to what we now know today as the European Union formed in 1993. The countries have given up some of their sovereignty, that they've given up some control to the European Union, which is headquartered in Brussels. I have a map of the EU. I do have a map of the EU. Notice that Britain is leaving in not too distant future. It's 27 countries, going to be down to 26 soon. So it's basically all the countries in color on here. The UK will be leaving. And it's a single market. It's a single market where they all have a common currency, and they have court systems, they have a parliament, they have a president. Now, the countries still hold more of the sovereignty together themselves, but they have given some to the European Union. They work together. What originally this was an opportunity to try to basically stop war, because if you're allied with people, you're not going to, if you're allied economically with them, you theoretically will not go to war with them. And so you're going to build the coal and the steel community, which in Europe, which will eventually morph into the EU. That's going to take place. Now, the other part of the EU is what's known as the Schengen area. So if I go back to this map, it doesn't matter whether you live in Portugal or Poland or Sweden or Denmark or Italy, no matter where you are, you can work in the other place. So if there's a job in France that people want, a person in Spain could go live in France and work there. In Germany, same thing. Germany could go work in Finland, whatever it is. And it's also free. It's open borders. So there's very little border security throughout Europe, that once you're into the Schengen area, you can get to basically any other country within Europe. Now, with migrant crises that have been taking place, some countries view migrants being on the negative side of things. Some countries have put up border security walls, Hungary being one of the more notable ones. A second trading bloc is OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, formed in 1960. It was basically an attempt to control the oil market for a period of time. I forgot to picture this one. Nope, I don't. Oh yeah, they're down here in the bottom. Here they are. So it's Ecuador, Venezuela, Algeria, Libya, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Nigeria, that is Gabon, and Angola, that work together to try to control the oil market. And they have been one of the largest. They have a ton of reserves, especially Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. They are going to control a lot of the oil market moving forward. Although the United States has greatly improved how much oil it has through different technologies. Last one to talk about is ASEAN. ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Here's your map. Here's your map. They have accelerated economic development and political stability. They have worked to create a free trade zone as well, similar to the EU. They also are able to stand up to China more, because China wants to have significant say in the region. Well, these countries now can work together. Long term, they have talked about becoming more like the EU, where they could have a parliament and a common currency and open borders. That's a long ways off, though. And so these countries are really, this time, they're gaining more and more power on the world stage because of their geographic location. You're with China up here in the north, India in the west. You're on a main shipping route in the world that we've talked about many times before. I mean, they could continue to gain a lot of power, and these countries are growing in population by leaps and bounds. Now, all of this globalization is taking place, and some people like it. Some people like it, and some people don't. Some people like it because those bigger markets, more economic growth. But then the critics would say, hey, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, have gained significant power. So whether that is a Red Cross on what could be a positive example, or a negative example with a business that comes in and runs roughshod over things, that they have gained significant power in the world today. Diminishes sovereignty. This is why the UK is leaving or has left. It's leaving in 2019. Yes, 2019. Why it's leaving the European Union is due to the fact they they thought they had given up too much power to Brussels, basically, and so they wanted to get that back. Especially refugees was one of their big issues. Third, destruction of the environment, because some places in the world have different environmental laws, and so critics would say that companies have moved their jobs to where environmental laws are less because it's cheaper. And last part, the socioeconomic gap, just the fact you look at part of the world and you have these gaps in socioeconomic status have only increased. I mean, this started really with the Industrial Revolution and has seen the gaps. In some places in the world, they've come down, and other places they've exacerbated even more. Next, more now on kind of on the cultural side of globalization. We're seeing more consumptions of good based on desire rather than need. So think about in your daily life. What are you consuming on a daily basis? How much of it do you actually need? Probably not a ton. And part of this is due to the fact that you have the excess cash is more than ever before, especially now in America, the concept of Americanization, where you look at how America has basically become or has been the economic power in the world, and the economic power in the world, well, that means what America has is going to spread out throughout the world. So when you look at like Latin America, you see an increasing dominance by the U.S. in terms of their influence, but then it also goes the other way. Let me provide an example for you that is kind of simple in nature and not that complex. Something as simple as Taco Bell being a mainstream restaurant in the United States. Well, I mean, it's taco. That's a Latin American concept for food. And so that's an example of something where globalization has definitely taken hold. And so when we're looking at how the world works today, these cultural practices have somewhat become globalized. Think of you could watch K-pop right now on YouTube. You could go on there and learn a ton of stuff about different cultures on YouTube. And consumption has really become a part of self-identity. So, and let me show you how consumption, local diversity, and globalization. So this is my wife on our wedding day, and she's wearing a very basic wedding dress. Nothing fancy, but very much a part of the American style. Notice her makeup. That's what we're going to concentrate on. Very normal looking makeup for a wedding. This is Reese Witherspoon. Same thing. Dress is maybe a little different. She personalized it a little bit for herself, but we're seeing it's pretty normal. Kate Middleton in Britain. Same thing, just a little fancier. But then you look at this. This is native Kosovoan wedding makeup. 4 people in Kosovo know how to do it at this point. 4. And that's because basically all of Kosovo has moved to a wedding dress style similar to this if it's a secular wedding. The last part. The last part here, part of the reason that Kosovo has changed, age of access. We have the time and the space. It's a concept called time-space compression that things are spreading faster than ever before. You can travel around the world more than ever before. You can consume more things than ever before. And also part of this is due to the fact America is a predominantly English-speaking country. That's becoming the language of the world more and more, partially due to the cultural imperialism of America, which would be considered the Americanization of things, that you see the rise of American things spreading, and English is being one of them. It's about 70%. Do I have that? Nope, I don't have that. 70% of internet websites are in English. And now you pair that with the fact, so this is a transportation map that in 1800 it took you this long from New York, it took you this long to get to wherever you are in the United States. Where today, if you hop on a plane, you can get from New York to London in about 4 hours. It's crazy. Okay? And so here's the internet, by the way. I knew I had that somewhere. And so you look at how the internet has changed things. That's only increasing the fact that you see the rise of the major languages of the world are only increasing. And some of those cultures that are not as popular, for whatever reason, are dying away. Like, I'll go back, like this type of wedding makeup. That you see more and more, they look more like this. Definitely need to know the trading blocks out of this stuff. Your European Union, you should also realize how China has risen, mainly due to the fact they've developed more market economies and people move jobs there. And then you